Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar titled Making the Move to an Enterprise CTMS for Organizations of Any Size, presented by Param Singh, Vice President of Clinical Trial Management Solutions at BioPharm Systems. I'm Eugene Stefanoff, the Marketing Manager at BioPharm, and I will be going over some housekeeping items before I turn it over to Param. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. However, you may submit questions to the speaker at any time today by typing them in the chat feature located on the left side of your screen. Please state your questions clearly. Note, other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments. Nonetheless, your questions to the speaker will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request additional information from BioPharm, feel free to visit the company's website for contact information. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on BioPharm's website within 24 hours. We will also be emailing you a link to the recording. This concludes our housekeeping items. I would now like to turn the call over to Param Singh.
Thank you, Eugene. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on making the move to an enterprise CTMS for organizations of any size. Let me start out by introducing myself. My name is Param Singh, and I'm the Vice President of the Clinical Trial Management Solution Practice at BioPharm Systems. I've been working within the industry since 1999 and have almost exclusively been working with Siebel Clinical during that time. Before joining BioPharm a little over 4.5 years ago, I was part of Accenture's pharma R&D practice and leading Siebel CTMS implementations there as well. And overall, now I've been part of more than 15 implementations of Siebel Clinical. So now that I've introduced myself, I'd like to take just a minute to talk about my team here at BioPharm and to explain a little bit more of what we do. We provide a variety of services and products related to clinical trial management. We manage implementations of Siebel Clinical, whether those are custom implementations or implementations of our Siebel Clinical Accelerator, Ascend. We also implement Oracle Health Sciences LabPass, which is Oracle's Phase 1 clinical automation solution. Also, if you've seen some of our previous webinars, you know that we do extensive work with integrations in Siebel Clinical or LabPass and related systems. Our approach to system implementations is also very, very process-focused. So we also provide our process consulting services to help organizations define and harmonize their SOPs and business process across their organization with respect to clinical trial management. And we offer comprehensive training services and products related to Siebel Clinical and our Ascend solution as well. So that's just a glimpse of some of the services and products that we offer in the space. And for more information, please feel free to contact me directly. So here's a look at today's agenda. We're going to start by defining an enterprise CTMS and some key indicators that an organization would benefit from a CTMS. Then we'll walk through some of the preliminary steps a company must take to gather support for the move to an enterprise CTMS and prepare for a CTMS implementation. We'll follow that with a checklist of factors that need to be considered during a CTMS selection process. And then we'll spend the final 15 minutes or so answering your questions. So as a reminder, if you do have any issues, please utilize the chat function just to identify any issues that you're having. And also, if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer at the end of the webinar during our QA session, please submit that in the chat function as well. Those questions come directly to myself and Eugene, and we'll answer them as time permits at the end of the session. And I do want to remind everybody again that we are recording the presentation, and we're going to post it to the website afterwards. So let's get started. So what is an enterprise CTMS? So for the purpose of our webinar, we're going to define the enterprise CTMS as a software system that meets the following criteria. One, that it's a single clinical trial management system that can be used by multiple business units or clinical research divisions within a company. So it's beneficial for sponsor organizations, contract research organizations, and academic medical centers. And it can be implemented organization-wide using a big bang approach, or it can be rolled out using a phased approach. It's also a centralized system for the management of all clinical trials. So this eliminates disparate spreadsheets and databases across trials. It will provide access to clinical trial information in real time, and it enforces consistency of administrative, operational, and financial aspects of trials across the organization. So when an organization takes a strategic approach to selecting an appropriate CTMS and implementing it properly, the result is an organization that ultimately reduces trial-related costs, increases trial management consistency and efficiency, streamlines the clinical trial management, and increases clinical research productivity. So now that we know what a CTMS is, can your company benefit from it? So key indicators that a CTMS is needed by your organization can be that your company has had recent rapid organizational growth, or there's an increase in the clinical trial pipeline as a result of recent or planned mergers, an increased number or size or complexity of trials, and the introduction or increased participation in global trials. These situations typically result in a corresponding need to improve the efficiency and turnaround times of clinical trials and to provide that access to real-time trial information. So if a strategic plan is not put in place to address outdated trial management techniques, it becomes increasingly difficult to quickly and accurately provide important trial information, such as which regulatory documents have been collected, and which ones are missing, how many sites, which sites have been initiated, when were they initiated, which investigators need to be paid per quarter, and how much should they be paid based on activities that have been performed or milestones that have been completed, how many site visits have occurred, how many site visits are planned for the next month, which monitoring reports have been submitted and waiting for review and approval, and which monitoring reports are late based on organizational standards. So this is all information that can be very, very difficult to access without a robust enterprise CTMS. Additional indicators of the need for a CTMS include a lack of comprehensive investigator site database, which results in inability to easily query historical data and makes it difficult to identify primary investigators or potential primary investigators and sites for trial feasibility purposes. So in addition, the continued use of a homegrown management system or disparate methods of investigator tracking can result in the inability to contrast and compare similar trials within your organization, lack of standardization of information that is tracked, conflicting information for the same contacts or organizations within the system, and the inability to track metrics across the trials. So in contrast, the implementation of a CTMS will enforce organizational SOPs and work practices and increase compliance. It will also eliminate individual approaches to investigator and study management by utilizing a single database with access controls by security roles and settings, and also using referential data like contacts and accounts and addresses that results in less time spent on data entry and data consolidation. Next, internal and external integrations are becoming increasingly critical to today's clinical trial industry as well. Organizations want to be able to integrate trial management systems with other applications such as internal customer master systems, document management systems, EDC and clinical data management systems, safety and financial systems, and others. So to justify and maximize the benefits from the IT expenditure, organizations want easy access to dashboard reports that compile information from all of these multiple sources and reduce the amount of double or triple entry by having multiple systems talk to one another and share key information such as contacts, accounts, addresses, subject visit information, adverse event details, and more. So now that we understand how an organization can benefit from a CTMS, let's next talk about the initial steps necessary to make that a reality. So a good bit of internal analysis and preparation needs to be performed to build a business case for an enterprise CTMS. A company must first understand their current trial management process and identify various pain points and perceived gaps. So the process should include the following steps. We need to identify the divisions, all divisions or business units currently performing clinical trials. We need to identify the average number, size, and length of all ongoing trials. And we need to review how trials are being managed both within the same division and across divisions. So with that, we need to identify the types of worksheets or databases that are utilized. We need to understand if there's a standard management process being followed. And if not, how much variation is there between study teams? Does the amount of variation depend on study managers, the protocol design, or both? And are SOPs and work practices up to date, and are they being followed? Additionally, we need to look at what documentation and reporting methods are being used, and how are investigator and site payments being tracked as well. So as you're performing this analysis, take time to really consider what role the new CTMS will play in the organization. So what manual or other database processes will the new application replace? How will the introduction of the system affect current staffing levels or job assignments? Will any of the system functions be centralized, and if so, which ones? And are there any parts of the new system that won't be used initially? Next, we need to identify the key stakeholders. So what group of individuals or functional groups will be affected by the implementation of a CTMS? This will include clinical operations, so study managers, regulatory personnel, QA, and CRAs, and other departments as well, such as IT, support, and finance, potentially. So we need to identify key business and IT resources for the CTMS project core team. Subject matter experts from each area are going to be the key. So at a minimum, the core group of the project team should consist of a strong project manager, a business lead, a technical lead, and a validation or QA lead. So recognize that these individuals will be involved in all aspects of the project preparation, implementation, and rollout, including configuration, integration, and workflow decisions. It's essential that from the beginning, each member of the group understand the need for the enterprise CTMS and they buy into that project. You need to document the roles and responsibilities for each member of the project team, and it's also a good idea to create a project charter that outlines the team goals to be reviewed and signed by all of the team members. It's essential that each project member be willing and able to devote the proper amount of time to the project. So if just one member is not able to attend meetings, review documents, provide feedback, then the knowledge or expertise held by that individual is lost, and appropriate decisions may not be made due to that lack of business or technical information. A key success factor for the project or for any project is going to be the quality and quantity of communication that's provided within the project team itself and to the end user community during the implementation. It's important to get buy-in from the end users from the start and to keep them excited and engaged throughout the project. So many organizations incorporate items like newsletters, websites, group meetings, and other communication tools to maintain that informed community. So before approaching potential CTMS vendors, an organization should create a list of requirements or a system requirement specification document. This document should detail and prioritize system requirements by department and by functional area. Any potential constraints, such as network access, VPN access, or firewall issues, or geographic location of end users, and additional functions such as migration services, integration services, should also be identified and documented. The list of requirements should be prioritized to assist with the determination of must-have requirements versus nice-to-have requirements. So this prioritization is going to come in handy if that list for the initial implementation needs to be minimized based on either available functionality or customization cost. So we're starting to plan for a new CTMS, but where's the money going to come from? A business case with a clear qualitative and quantitative return on investment is going to be needed. So upper management will need a clear picture of the key benefits of a CTMS, an estimated budget and timeline, and an idea of how that expenditure will increase efficiency and reduce costs overall. The business case should include cost and time justifications, key benefits of the CTMS, how's the CTMS going to be selected, and how is the CTMS going to be implemented, an estimated timeline, and post-implementation costs. So when discussing project costs, be sure to consider all project-related costs, including post-implementation costs. So these may include ongoing system support and maintenance, potential new hire costs for administrators of the system, perhaps, system upgrades, and any continuous improvement that's planned in subsequent phases of the implementation. Project and system funding approval and management buy-in should be secured before moving forward with CTMS selection. So your organization has decided that it needs an enterprise CTMS and funding has been approved. You're now ready to proceed with the CTMS selection phase. So in the time remaining for the webinar, we're going to walk through a pretty lengthy checklist that covers several areas of several of the key considerations to take into account during that selection process. First of all, your project team needs to identify available CTMS systems for consideration. To do this, we recommend becoming familiar with basic CTMS functionality and terminology. You can do that by just performing internet searches or joining webinars that speak to that topic. You need to identify potential vendors and then research the functionality provided by their CTMS. And at this point, you should also consider the benefits of a CTMS accelerator versus an off-the-shelf product, which can greatly reduce implementation costs and time frames. And to identify potential vendors, we suggest looking at industry recommendations and attending industry conferences on the topic and looking at sort of the thought leaders in the space, and looking at vendor websites for product data sheets. So there's lots of detailed information about the various CTMS tools out there and product data sheets, and those can be helpful in looking at feature lists and comparisons. So as you become familiar with what is available and the basic functionality provided by each solution, your team can narrow down the list of potential vendors. So you can do that. You can start to do this by having initial phone conversations and remote demos with those vendors, and also, again, request feature comparisons between systems. So at that time, you'll probably want to create and distribute an RFP, request for proposal, based on the list of requirements and vendor research that you've done. Based on those RFP responses that you get, it's a good idea to invite the top 2 or 3 vendors to demonstrate their system on site and respond to face-to-face questions by the team. There would typically be some follow-up questions and calls following the demos until the team feels confident that one system stands out and it's the best fit for your organization. So after narrowing down the potential vendor systems that you're looking at, it's going to be important to consider some key aspects of the system. The first is performance. A CTMS should demonstrate consistent performance and response times under repeated tests of real-world scenarios. This is true for day-to-day performance, querying, and reporting. Users don't have time to wait for the system to respond to various commands. The software manufacturer should incorporate tools and techniques to minimize any anticipated performance issues. Next is scalability. When a company starts performing an increased number of trials, the CTMS needs to be expandable or scalable in order to handle the increased amount of data tracking. It must also be able to handle a larger number of concurrent users. So it's also important to know any potential costs associated with scaling up a CTMS, such as additional servers, more user licenses, additional performance tuning that may be needed, etc. So the bottom line here is that the system should be able to grow and scale as your organization and business grow as well. Another key consideration is robustness. A robust system is one that performs a wide range of functionality. So for a CTMS, that means you want to select a system that can support most, if not all, of your trial management tasks, from feasibility to study startup to subject tracking and provider payments. A robust system also refers to a system that has been coded properly. So the system should not completely go down if one issue is experienced during day-to-day production use. Next is system customizations. When looking at various systems, you'll need to find out what type, if any, customizations or configurations are possible. So at that time, you'll need to figure out what, if any, customizations your organization would need to the system. So while the flexibility that is provided by a highly configurable or customizable system is good and quite tempting in most cases, try to limit the automation and customization you add for the initial implementation of the system. Weigh the pros and cons of each custom configuration you're considering, and keep in mind that each customization is going to increase the cost of your implementation and will also extend the project timeline. There are a series of technical considerations to keep in mind as well during the selection process. So each CTMS vendor should be able to provide details regarding the standard technical architecture setup for the application, the minimum and recommended hardware and software specifications, how the database should be sized based on your organization's data needs, what load balancing options are available and appropriate for your company. Can you utilize VMware to establish multiple environments you will need during the implementation? What performance tuning tools are available? What server monitoring tools are available? How database backup and restore are handled? And what is a standard data recovery approach, a disaster recovery approach? Next, we need to look at implementation options. Some vendors will offer all of these options, while other systems only offer, systems and vendors only offer a software as a service model. So you must consider which are available and which options are going to be appropriate for your organization. So on-premises is where all the hardware and software is owned, housed, and maintained by your organization. Dedicated hosting, all the hardware and software is owned by your organization, but is housed and maintained in a vendor data center. Shared hosting, the software is owned by your organization, but the hardware is owned and housed and maintained at a vendor center on shared servers. And then we have software as a service, or SaaS, which is the true cloud offering, where your organization doesn't own, house, or maintain any software or hardware. It just leases that the use of both from a vendor. So with any implementation, data migration needs to be considered as well. Determine what, if any, data will be migrated from current systems or spreadsheets. Typically, the migration of data sounds easier than it actually is. Depending on the data source, the data to be migrated will need to meet specific format criteria, which can be a time-consuming exercise, especially if the data will be migrated from multiple sources. In addition, it's always a good practice to clean the data prior to migrating it to the new system. So a cost analysis of programmatic migration versus manual entry should always be performed. Similar to data migration, your integration options need to be considered as well. So more and more we're seeing that organizations are maximizing their IT investments by developing automated interfaces between key systems. In today's IT environment, most CTMS solutions can be integrated with multiple systems. And examples of common integrations with the CTMS include clinical data management or EDC systems to import subject and subject visit data to automate the creation of subjects and automate site payments as related to completed milestones. From that, there's an integration with financial systems where we can export payment requests out to accounts payable and actually import the details of the payment back into the system. Integration with a safety system for reconciliation of monitored adverse events. Integration with a document management system to link the document tracking records to the electronic copies of the documents where they're stored in the document management system. And we have also an integration with Clinical Data Warehouse to automatically transfer the majority of the study data that populates key metrics and performance indicators in dashboards and reports that are run off that data warehouse. And another recent trend has been for pharma and device companies to integrate with their preferred CRO partners. So this enabled them to import outsourced study data directly from the CRO system into the organization's in-house CTMS. So regardless of the number and types of integrations your organization is considering, keep in mind that this will significantly increase the cost of a CTMS implementation, and if it's performed in parallel with the initial implementation, it will extend the timeline as well. So several organizations have found that it's best to first implement the base CTMS and then perform one or more integrations as separate phases or future phases. This method provides the basic functionality of a CTMS to the end users more quickly by accelerating that timeline, and gives them a chance to get familiar with the system and better understand what integration items might be beneficial. So it's also recommended that you analyze the integration methods proposed by each vendor. Some methods are more practical than others in that they can be reused with other applications or other vendors. So next is choosing an implementation partner. Once a selection has been made as to which CTMS is the best fit for your organization, it's a good idea to identify potential implementation partners. The software vendor may have the expertise to also be the implementation partner, but be sure to explore other options as well. A company that specializes in implementations of the selected CTMS will often be more cost-effective and provide a wider range of implementation services, including integration and migration services, and may provide hosting options as well. In addition, a reputable implementation partner will be experienced in the validation of CTMS systems and will be able to guide you through that process if system validation is required by your organization. Identifying an implementation partner is done in very much the same way as identifying the best system, through research, obtaining recommendations, reviewing vendor offerings, bringing implementation vendors on site for analysis workshops, etc. So keep in mind that your implementation experience will only be as good as the implementation partner that you select. A CTMS implementation is not considered complete until all end users are thoroughly trained prior to go live. So ideally, training will take place over multiple sessions. Organizations can opt to use a train-the-trainer approach or perform a big bang training approach depending on the size and the culture of the organization, or a combination of these two approaches is also possible. Regardless of which approach is selected, the organization will need to have a group of system super users who are qualified to train new users or provide follow-up training to existing users over time. The focus of application training should be to familiarize the users with new and revised SOPs and work practices, with special emphasis given to how these relate to the CTMS workflow and day-to-day tasks. Need to provide the users with an overview of the system navigation and functionality using visual aids, user guides, quick reference tools, and live demos. We need to give and provide hands-on opportunity and or a sandbox or training environment that the users can use to familiarize themselves with the available functionality and then gain the confidence needed to proceed to the production system. And we need to provide ongoing follow-up sessions or small group sessions as needed as well. The last thing is you need to establish a support system and inform users of the steps that they need to take when a system issue is experienced or questions arise, which leads us to our final item on the checklist, which is post-implementation support. So each system, each CTMS vendor and implementation partner should have affordable, flexible options for post-implementation support. The type of support, this type of support is typically used when an internal support system is not available to resolve a user or system issue. So in implementing a support structure, it's important to utilize your super users or individuals that have been part of the implementation process as integral parts of that support system. So your first line of defense should be those system super users in each area, in each functional area within your organization, and then the external support. Once it sort of routes its way through that internal support, if issues cannot be addressed through that, then you move on to the external support. And that external support options should include the following: a live phone support, email support, remote access capabilities, so the individual that's providing the support can actually log into your system to reproduce issues that your users may be having, and then the availability of a searchable knowledge base. So as you get issues, documenting them in a knowledge base, and a searchable knowledge base should be available so that frequently encountered issues can be handled through just searching the knowledge base rather than utilizing one-on-one time with a support resource. So the goal of an external support system should be to resolve system issues quickly and effectively. So having all of these options and having internal support resources available as well, you need to make sure that all end users are familiar with that process and know sort of the chain of where they need to go if they encounter an issue within the system. So that brings us to the end of today's presentation. So to recap, we went through and identified some key indicators for the need for a CTMS. So whether that includes organizational growth, rapid organizational growth, the need for visibility to real-time information across trials, and the desire to integrate this data to other systems. We also looked at the internal analysis and preparation that is needed prior to moving to a CTMS, which includes analyzing internal trial management processes, identifying all of your critical needs and requirements, and also, very importantly, building a business case and getting senior management support and obtaining funding for the CTMS. And finally, we looked at a long list of key considerations for selecting a CTMS, from system functionality and performance to implementation options to data migration and integration options to partner selection and training considerations. So we tried to cover as much as possible so that organizations potentially heading down this path will be equipped with this knowledge and at the very least have a checklist to guide them through this process. So I hope that you know, the topics for today are relevant for those of you that are on the call, and this will actually provide you with a good roadmap at least and a checklist to guide you through that process. So with that, we'll move into your questions. And as a reminder, just submit your questions in the chat function on your screen, and then we'll try to address as many questions as time allows for today. Eugene?
Great. Thank you, Param. So we'll give it a minute just to take some more questions. We have a good number right now. We won't ask them in a particular order, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. So let's give it another 30 seconds or so. Okay, so we'll move on to the first question. Can you explain further what is meant by accelerators?
Sure. So there are many systems out on the market that provide sort of an out-of-the-box functionality, but they're able to be configured or customized, and typically are during an implementation. So I'll use the example of Siebel Clinical. So Siebel Clinical, no organization to date has used it completely out of the box. So every organization takes all the robust functionality that's available in Siebel Clinical and then further configures it during their implementation. So to do that design and to do that development, it typically takes about 9 to 12 months of implementation time to get you to go live with that standard sort of implementation. Accelerators are things that implementation partners have built to streamline that implementation. So for us specifically, for BioPharm, our past experience has led us to see that a lot of our clients are asking for a lot of the same configurations within Siebel Clinical. So what we did is pre-build or build out a pre-configured version of Siebel Clinical called Ascend, and that's our accelerator. So that basically allows us to take an implementation that would typically take about 10 to 12 months down to, in some cases, 10 to 12 weeks of implementation. And so the accelerator not only comes with the functionality, but it also comes with all of the documentation and validation that's needed to implement a system like that. So it's been really successful, within our business and for our clients to again streamline that and provide that sort of cost and timeline savings by the use of an accelerator.
Great, thank you. Next question, do you recommend enterprise CTMS even for companies that outsource much of clinical trial activity to CROs?
That's a great question. So we've seen a pretty big trend of outsourcing to CROs in recent years, and but that still hasn't necessarily meant that in-house CTMS systems are not relevant. So particularly in the case where a company is still doing sort of a hybrid approach, where they're doing some trials in-house and some trials outsourced, we see obviously the need for an in-house CTMS, and in those cases, I mentioned earlier about integration with the CRO partners. Certain organizations have integrated their in-house systems with their partner systems as well, so that they're going to bring all of that data together, so they have all of their trials, whether they're in-house or outsourced, in the same system to do that sort of trend analysis, to do that overall reporting across all of their trials across their organization. So I think from the definition of the enterprise CTMS system that we made earlier, all of your trials in a centralized location, I think the need is still there to bring all of that information together, just from a management and progress reporting and key performance metrics and reporting perspective. That's still going to be a need. If all of your trials are completely outsourced, one of the things that you may be able to utilize if you're not doing any specific management of those trials and we're just getting that data and just reporting off of it, and you don't have any in-house trials, you may be able to just bring in all of that data into a clinical data warehouse instead of an actual CTMS system. So that's another option that's available. So again, the goal is eventually to have all of your trial data in a single system. So depending on whether you do some in-house trials or you outsource 100%, there may be a couple different options available to you. But between an enterprise CTMS and a clinical data warehouse, I think your sort of options lie between those two systems.
Great, thank you. Next question, if any, what integrations do you recommend as part of the initial implementation?
So again, with integrations, we've seen a lot of success with implementing a base CTMS without any integrations in the initial phases, and what that does is allow you to have a stable system. It allows us to sort of have the users use the system and understand all the process and make sure that the system is stable and there's no changes, no radical changes that are needed to the system before tying it to other systems in terms of integration. Because if we do that as part of the initial phase, and then there are some additional enhancements that are needed, it's pretty likely that your integration that you've created is going to need to be enhanced as well. So our recommendation is always to try to do a base implementation without integrations in phase one, and then introduce integration in a point release or a phase two type of scenario. And in most cases with that, you're not extending that timeline out too much by doing that, right? So because if you incorporate the integration in with the initial phase, you still need to work hand in hand with the enhancements and configurations that you're making with the base system. So the timeline for that initial phase will get moved out. So if you do an initial phase with the base functionality, you can actually deliver that to your users a lot quicker, and then you can start in parallel, start to define and design the integration that you're going to do in a point release and deliver that shortly thereafter. So, but that still gives the users some time with the system in production to be able to use it and sort of track their information, and then do that integration at a later in a later phase. But if we look at sort of prioritizing the integrations, what we've typically seen is that the EDC interface is one of the ones that are most desirable from a clinical operations perspective, because EDC or clinical data management systems have that information about subjects and subject visits and when they're being completed. So to reduce that duplicate data entry, the integration between those two systems really delivers a lot of benefits. So that's one of the ones that we see on the top of the list with the CTMS integration.
Great. Next question is, who are the key CTMS providers out there?
Key CTMS providers. So for CTMS, obviously Oracle delivers Siebel CTMS, which is the leader in the space. I think from a market share perspective, that's a system that we have determined internally at BioPharm that we're going to implement and support. There are Medidata has a new system that they've acquired as well. So Medidata has a CTMS. Impact has always been, one of the leaders in the space. Although I think that's changing in recent years. So there are, at those levels, there's those CTMS providers. There are also a lot geared towards smaller organizations. There are some CTMS providers that offer a more of a SaaS solution, so software as a service. So essentially you're looking at a system that's housed and supported on their sort of network on their data centers, and you're essentially just buying or renting the use of that system. And that's geared towards more sort of smaller organizations that have sort of smaller clinical operations groups. So there's when we're talking about enterprise CTMS, I think the ones that I mentioned are sort of the forerunners, but there are some other providers that offer more of a simpler CTMS solution, which is purely web-based, no installations, no setup time. You just decide that you want a CTMS, and they get you access to their system, and they segment out your data. So your specific organization's data and users will be segmented out from other organizations using that same system.
Great, thank you. Next question is, at what scale of trials does a company need to consider acquiring or renting a CTMS? So that's part of the process of building that business case, right? So if you're internally, if you're running not that many trials in a year, and the management of it and the consolidation of the data doesn't require a whole lot of time commitment and work effort, then you may not be ready for a full-on CTMS implementation. However, like I said, some of the simpler solutions out there, or maybe a SaaS solution, may be cost-effective, and it'll still give you that added benefit of additional functionality and the ability to have everything in one place. So the main thing is, how much of your time right now are you spending trying to get reports and trying to get data of across trials. So I wouldn't say it's the scale of trials. It really needs to be
an organizational-led sort of initiative to say that we need to ensure compliance across all these trials. So even if you have just 2 or 3 trials happening a year, and each of your study managers are doing it very, very differently, if that's something that is a desire across the organization to basically streamline that, to ensure compliance, to adhere to SOPs, and it's been a challenge with the current tools that you're using, I would say that going to a centralized CTMS is going to be very beneficial for you. And in some cases, it may not be that much of a financial investment, right? So there are different options for CTMS out there. So first you need to identify sort of the pain points that you're having, and if you're not having any pain points, and if the current management of it is working with the current tools that you have, you may not be ready to make that investment. But if there is a sort of a directive from upper management to move to a more standard way of doing and managing clinical trials, that's when I say that it's probably time to make that move to a CTMS.
Thank you. Next question: do you have any recommendations for managing point releases after the initial go live?
Yes. So when we do initial implementations, what we try to do is capture all the requirements that the organization have or the users have for the system. So when you do that initial system requirement specification document, make sure that you document all of your requirements. That's not to say that those are the requirements that you'll implement on phase 1. So when you prioritize that list and minimize that list, it's important to keep that documentation sort of going, right? So once after go live, and even before the initial implementation, you need to develop sort of a roadmap of what your CTMS is going to, how it's going to evolve and scale. So we mentioned that doing a base system first, and then potentially handling some automation and some integration in a later phase. So continuous improvement efforts will loop into that. So we're already scaling for and planning for a point release to incorporate integration, for example. At the same time, when the users start to use the system, they're going to have specific feedback to the project team about additional enhancements, additional fields, additional functionality that they may want in the system. So with a system like Siebel and others, where you are able to configure and enhance the system on an ongoing basis, that continuous improvement work stream should take a look at any and all of the enhancement requests that are coming in, and prioritize that and into manageable chunks. So we see it. Some organizations do continuous improvement or point releases on a monthly basis, which I think is a bit aggressive. I think quarterly is much more manageable to be able to push out additional enhancements on a quarterly basis. And with that, you're also meeting the expectations of your end users. So it's not like we're implementing a system and they're not going to see another enhancement for another year. So if we put together a schedule that the users can expect additional functionality each quarter, then that's good from a user adoption and communication standpoint. And so prioritizing the list of the enhancements, prioritizing the list of bug fixes and things like that need to be incorporated into the continuous improvement work stream. And also your support organization is going to receive a lot of support calls for functionality that may be working, but has that users have had particular problems with. So looping in your support resources in your continuous improvement discussions is going to be important, because that'll feed directly into either enhancements of the system or enhancements to training and other initiatives that are related to the system as well. And incidentally, we're actually going to be doing a webinar or a presentation on continuous improvement, so how to manage point releases. So that would be relevant. So keep looking on our website for when that is going to be available.
Great, thanks. It looks like we have used up the allotted time we have for this webinar, so I think that'll end our Q&A session. If you do have other questions, please feel free to contact us via phone or email. You can see Param's information right here. These phone numbers are to our sales team, but if you need to get to Param, they can direct you to him directly. Once again, please note that today's webinar will be available on biopharm.com within 24 hours for you to review and share with your colleagues. We thank you for your participation and hope that the information we provided you today was helpful. Enjoy the rest of your day and evening, and we look forward to having you at future webinars. Thanks so much.